So the cause could be the kind of condition or situation which the government may face, right? So in this specific case, say for instance, one can take the example of anti-corruption movement in 2010 and 11, that led to the government to put in place a legislation for Lokayukta and Lokpal, right? So that is something one can connect. Meaning that whenever one is looking at the policy is not an outcome of the innovative thinking of the government. Rather, policies, they are always a byproduct of the existing causes, right? So that is the second way that people have tried to look at the policies when they want to understand that why policies actually exist, what are the likely objectives which the government wants to achieve through the means of a specific policy, right? So all these things people have tried to look at. But the most significant approach, which was taken in the initial stage, that was again from Harold Laswell, right? And this is what we know as the method of understanding policies through processes, right? So the policy process approach, wherein policies are understood in terms of these cycles, right? In terms of the cycles which they undergo, right? So there would be different stages, and each stage would follow the previous one, and once the stages are completed in a specific sequence, then it is taken to mean that a particular cycle has been completed. And that is how one can look at in terms of understanding of the policy. So if you want to understand the policy of the government, then you have to look at those stages, you have to look at this cycle, right? And by looking at that cycle, you can understand the policy. So just to repeat the point. Uh, okay. Hmm. Okay, see, all these things are important when we are trying to understand the public policy, right? And there is definitely a relationship that why the government, would formulate policies when the government is only looking at to remain in power by forming coalitions, and there might not be any significant ethical or moral or ideological ground, or a significant uh, uh, you know objective which is to be pursued solely for the purpose of governance. Then how one would look at the policies, right? And see, the larger point you are trying to raise is the relationship between politics and policy, right? So whether politics, they determine policies in the last instance, and what is the relationship, right? So we'll come back to all these issues, right? And that is where one has to understand that if we are trying to understand the meaning of policy, then are we supposed to look at the actions of government alone? Meaning that, is it not that when one is trying to look at the meaning of public policy only with respect to the actions of government, then this becomes a kind of narrow definition, right? So the larger methodological point, which may be your question connected to, is that are there other factors than the actions of government which one is required to look at when one is understanding policies, right? So we are coming to all those issues, we are coming to all those points. Okay, so the first thing we have to keep in mind that when we are trying to understand policies, then in Laswell's perspective, we have to look at the process. And what is this process? This process involves the sequence of certain stages in a cycle, meaning that the stages, when they are completed in a sequence, so that is where it would be understood that the cycle has been completed as far as the whole process of policy formulation and policy implementation is concerned, right? And if one has to understand the policy, then one has to look at these stages, that how the stages they were completed, right? Where there were gaps, how one can look at the actions of the government, the larger objectives the government is required to be associated with when the government is formulating a policy or implementing the policy. Now, it is not simply the formulation and implementation, but it is also the assessment part which becomes important in last best understanding, right? Meaning that, to understand the policy would mean not only to look at the way policies are formulated or implemented, but also the assessment of the outcomes of the policy. So that is where the larger issue or larger question is linked to the objectives which the government may be trying to meet with when it puts a policy in place. Now, what is this policy cycle that I'm referring to with respect to Laswell's understanding of the policy process, right? Now, if you recall, I had made a point earlier that in Laswell's understanding, uh, studying policy is to happen in a scientific way, meaning that when we say policy studies, we mean policy science, right? So he would say that when we are trying to understand the policy cycle, then we are required to look at 7 different stages in the cycle. And once these 7 stages are completed, then that would mean that policy cycle has been completed, right? Now, what are these 7 stages that Laswell is referring to then, right? And is it that once the stages would be completed, then it would mean the complete study of the policy. So that is where the point I'm interested in looking at, that as far as Laswell's approach is concerned, then his approach to understand policy in terms of cycles, right? Whether it it merits consideration with respect to the understanding of the policy in a significant manner, or whether there are certain limitations or where there are certain gaps when we are trying to look at Laswell's approach to understand policy, right? So as I referred to 7 different stages, so these 7 different stages in Laswell's understanding would include, first, what he says as intelligence. Right? That would be the first stage of the cycle in Laswell's understanding of a particular policy. Right? The second would be promotion. Intelligence, right? Intelligence. Okay. Intelligence. Right? Second would be promotion. I will elaborate all these stages which Laswell explains as stages in his policy cycle, right? I will come to them, right? I will elaborate them a bit, but just to tell you that the first one is intelligence, second one is promotion, third one is prescription, right? So intelligence, promotion, prescription. Then the fourth stage would be invocation. Fifth would be application. Then there would be termination and appraisal. Right? Termination and appraisal. These would be the 7 different stages, and they would follow one another in sequence. And once seventh one was appraisal, right? Termination, appraisal. Okay, I will repeat them once more. Intelligence, promotion, prescription, invocation, application, right? Then termination and appraisal. Okay, clear? All these 7 stages, right? So in Laswell's understanding, once these 7 stages they follow one another in sequence, then it would mean that a cycle has been completed, and this is what one is required to look at in order to understand the policy of the government. Laswell significantly understands that in the policy cycle only government matters, meaning that the actors in the government, they only play a significant role as far as the policy cycle is concerned, right? Now, the first, let me elaborate a bit on all these stages, and then we can try to make an assessment of Laswell's approach of understanding policy. Right? First one is intelligence. What Laswell calls as intelligence. Now, intelligence means what? In Laswell's understanding, in order to make a policy, the governments, they require certain information and data, right? Meaning that any policy of the government is not made in vacuum, right? So the government would make policies only when it has sufficient information or data with respect to a particular problem.